The lawyer read the will slow, the way lawyers do, and by the time he got to the last parcel, everyone in the room already knew what it meant. To my youngest, Samuel, the 40 acres known as the lower pasture, and the note in the study desk. Samuel Veet sat very still, and his 3 siblings did not quite look at him, because there was nothing polite to say about it. The lower pasture was the field everyone on the place had treated like a punishment for 100 years. Low, wet, prone to flooding, full of rocks that wore out equipment, worthless for crops or grazing. A field that had cost the Veet family money to maintain and never once returned $1. The good ground, the 200 acres of black bottom soil, the river view property, the equipment shed, and the house that had all been divided among Samuel's older siblings, the ones who'd stayed close and made the expected choices. Samuel, who'd left for 15 years and come back quiet and asked for nothing, got the worst field and a note nobody had seen yet. He found it that evening in his father's desk, in an envelope with his name written in his father's hand. A hand that had steadied tractors and steadied the whole family for 83 years before the stroke took the strength and the cancer took the rest. Samuel opened it, alone in the study. "Sam, I watched you for 40 years. I watched all 4 of you. This field is yours because you're the only one who'll know what to do with it. Don't sell it. Don't drain it. Dig it." Dad, that was all. No explanation. No map. Just an old man's instruction to dig the field nobody wanted, and a certainty Samuel didn't deserve and couldn't yet explain, that his father had known something the rest of the family couldn't see. Because here was the thing nobody else had paid attention to, the thing Samuel understood only because he'd spent his years away learning to see it. His father had been watching, all along, not for who stayed and who left, not for who worked hardest or who laughed loudest, but for who treated what they were given with the kind of care that speaks to who a person is at the bone. Samuel's father, Martin Veet, had run the place 60 years with a philosophy nobody would have called a philosophy if he'd named it. He'd just lived it, steady and plain. He could see a man's character in how he handled the hired hands. He could see it in how a child treated a horse that couldn't be sold for money. He could see it in whether a person respected ground that didn't show respect back. And he'd watched Samuel's siblings the way a man watches cards being dealt, not judging, just seeing, and he'd understood who they were. The oldest, Marcus, was a good manager and a loyal son, but he saw the farm as an asset to be optimized, and he'd begun already to talk about selling pieces of it to developers. The middle son, James, was a harder worker than anyone, but he worked to prove something, and Martin had seen him cut corners and tell small lies to make things look better than they were. The daughter, Helen, had married well and stayed close, and was kind, but she was kind the way you're kind to something that belongs to you, with the assumption of ownership. And then there was Samuel, the youngest, the one who'd left at 23 in some kind of grief nobody had asked him about, who'd worked other people's land for 15 years in silence, and who'd come home at 38 quiet as a stone. Martin had watched that one come home, watched him work the hired hand jobs around the place without complaint, watched him spend an evening with an old horse that was lame and useless, watched him refuse Marcus's offer of money to leave and find something easier. And Martin had known then what he'd suspected all his life, that his youngest son had the thing that mattered most, which was the kind of care that keeps working even when there's nothing in it for you. So when the time came to divide the place, Martin had made his choice, and it was the choice a wise man makes when he knows his death is coming and he needs to put valuable things in hands that will actually value them. He left Samuel the field nobody wanted because he knew Samuel would dig it. And Samuel did. Spring came after the reading, and Samuel took a shovel and a hand auger out to the lower pasture and started at the high corner, driving the auger down through the wet ground, pulling up cores of earth, looking for the thing his father had hidden, or the thing his father had known was there. 20 feet, 30 feet, The ground came up darker as he went deeper, richer, and at 40 feet the auger hit something that was not soil. Stone, a seam of it, pale and layered, running under the field like a vein. Samuel pulled the auger up and looked at the pale stone and understood nothing at first. And then, slowly, the way understanding comes when you've been primed to see it, he understood what his father had known. The lower pasture wasn't a poor field. It was limestone. Agricultural limestone, the exact thing every acid-soured field in the region needed to be productive again. His father had known it for 60 years and had never said a word, had let the field sit, had made sure it ended up in the hands of the one child who'd care enough to dig for it instead of just assume. The work of it took the whole season, a small quarry operation, bringing in the right equipment, cutting the stone careful, the proper size for spreading. But by the time summer came full, Samuel had stone enough to supply the valley for 3 years. And the price of it, agricultural limestone, mined, processed, delivered, was enough to save the whole operation. To keep Marcus from selling to developers, to give James and Helen their shares in cash instead of property, to keep the Vite place whole. And more than that, it made Samuel's field valuable in a way that mattered, not because the limestone had price, but because by digging for it, by working the ground his father had entrusted to him. Samuel had found the thing his father had actually been looking for all his life, which was a child who would receive a hard thing and honor it instead of resent it. The reckoning came gentle, because Martin Vite had raised people to think, not to rage. Marcus, when he understood what the lower pasture was, came to Samuel with a face that had gone through several things and landed on shame. Dad knew, Marcus said. He knew that field was valuable, and he gave it to you instead of to me, and I would have sold it to a developer. He sat down slow. He was testing us. No, Samuel said, and this was the grace in it. The thing his father had actually taught by giving the worst field to the best son. He wasn't testing us. He was just seeing us. And then he put something precious in the only hands he knew would care for it. He let it sit. He didn't expect you to dig for nothing, Marcus. He expected you to take what you'd been given and make it shine. You were always going to make it shine. You just would have made it shine doing something else. That's not wrong. That's just who you are. The 3 siblings came out to watch the limestone work that summer, and they each saw something different. Helen saw her youngest brother finally at peace, working ground he owned. James saw the mathematics of the operation, the yield, the process, the market efficiency, and had to admit, quiet, that his youngest brother was running it smarter than he would have. And Marcus, who'd spent his life seeing the farm as a thing to be sold, stood on the lip of the quarry and understood, maybe for the first time, that some things were meant to be kept, and that keeping required a kind of person, and that his father had been wise enough to know which person that was. The good spread the way it does. The limestone, distributed through the valley at fair price, turned acid ground productive again, and farms that had been struggling came back, and Samuel's work saved not just the Vite place, but a whole network of smaller operations around it. But more than the good that came from the product, more than the money, was the thing his father had actually given, which was the knowledge. Proven and plain, that character matters, that seeing matters, that the quiet person who leaves and comes back and asks for nothing might be carrying something more than the loud person who stays and takes everything. Samuel kept the note on the shelf by the kitchen window where the light hit it, and some mornings he'd read it again, his father's handwriting, confident, knowing, I watched you. This field is yours, because you're the only one who'll know what to do with it. And he understood, reading it, that Martin Vite had spent his whole life doing the thing his father had taught him, not judging people by what they took or kept or asked for, but by how they treated what they'd been given. And that understanding, that patient seeing, had been worth more than any acres to pass on. In the coda, when Samuel was old himself and had his own children grown, he thought about what his father had given him, not just the field. but the knowledge that being overlooked was sometimes a kindness, and that the worst ground sometimes held the richest secret, and that a man's worth was written not in what he inherited, but in what he did with what nobody else wanted. He wrote it down, for whoever came after, in a margin of his father's will. Not a formal amendment, just a note. The way his father had left him a note. He watched. He saw who we were. And he trusted the one person who didn't need to be told to dig. And on the shelf by that window sat the note his father left. And below it another note, written in Samuel's hand. And someday there would be a third, written by a child who'd understood what Martin Veit actually knew, that a father's greatest gift is not what he gives you, but the fact that he saw you clearly and loved you anyway, and knew, when the time came to divide the world, exactly where your gifts would matter most. If you've ever been given the thing everyone else dismissed, and found out it was exactly what you needed to become who you were meant to be, tell us about it in the comments. We read them all. The moral runs plain as limestone under poor ground. A man's worth is not in what he inherits, but in how he treats what he's given. And the parent who sees clearly and trusts wisely gives their children not their best acres, but the ground where they'll discover their own. The worst field sometimes holds the richest secret, and the one who digs for it is the one who deserved to. Tell us where you're listening from tonight, and about the person who saw you clearly, not your potential, but who you actually were, and trusted you with something precious because of it. If this story reached you, share it with someone who's been given the overlooked thing and wondered if they were loved less for it. And whatever hard ground you've inherited, whatever field nobody else wanted, may you dig deep enough to find what your father knew was there all along, waiting on hands that would know how to honor it.